My talk will now begin. My name is Adrian Crenshaw. Dale gave an intro to me before. Unfortunately, I didn't get all the video from the very beginning of the conference, but I'm here now and things are running. Now, my talk today is going to be on Webshells, history, techniques, obfuscation, and automated collection. Come up with a little script for that hopefully some of you might like to run on your own sites. Especially anybody who's running like ASP, I'd be curious to know what kind of bots are out there for that, what kind of malware and web shells people are throwing at your site. I get mostly PHP stuff thrown at me, so this talk is going to be mostly about PHP web shells, just because that's what I encounter. I run IronGeek.com, as Dale always said. I have an interest in InfoSec education. I don't know everything, I'm just a geek with time in my hands. If I get something wrong, come up and tell me about it. I don't know everything, so let me know what I get wrong. If you know any good research on this stuff that I haven't talked about inside this talk, please let me know, and I'd be interested in looking into it more. I am a senior information security engineer at Diebold, doing managed services and pen test work. So if you want to make my boss happy for letting me take off time to go to all these conferences and record them, send us some work. That's the end of my work spiel. And I'm also a co-founder of DerbyCon. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what a web shell is. A web shell is essentially a script that acts as a backdoor. Think of it as a remote access tool on the web. Common tasks you can do with one once you get one uploaded to a site is file management, command line access, database server access, brute forcing, network scanning, and pivots. The core ones you're normally going to see though is more than anything like file management and shell execution. That's something you see in most all these shells. And it's not just a PHP problem. There's web shells out there for, well, PHP of course, ASP, ASP.NET, JSP, pretty much any language you can think of, there's a web shell written in it. Now, I want to do something like what Jason Scott does in some of his talks and actually give some of the history and background of web shells. Unfortunately, I'm having a hard time finding the earliest reference to a web shell. I started Googling around, finding stuff. Attribution is hard. A lot of people don't necessarily put dates in their code, and they do put a date in their code. Who's to say it's accurate? I found some really old references back to 1994 to people talking about it. I've seen C99 shells that have been dated back to 2005. I actually started looking for common web shells and things that are in web shells using Google searches and specifying certain dates. And if you do a search that's before 1/1/2005, for some reason a lot of web shells turn up. And strangely enough, there's this particular date. If you try to search for that date in Google using file type, text, PHP, data range, and that's how you specify the date. I think that's the number of. Oh, was that Julian?
Julian count?
Yeah. If you specify that, it comes up for things within that particular date, and there's tons and tons of web shells that come up. And if anybody knows why that is, I'd be really curious. Also, I found this reference to timestamps and PHP where they got the day wrong for the date, and people kept repeating that throughout time because someone kept copying the same code over and over again.
It's just probably related to the birth of PHP.
Birth of PHP? I'm thinking it predates that though. I'm thinking it might be like 1970, number of seconds since, something to that extent. My history with them. Well, my first experiences with them probably go back to when I was working at the New Albany paper mill. They set up something for students to be able to set up their own web pages, which is cool. And one of the things they did though was, besides I think occasionally having web servers running with FAT32 file systems, is they had PHP on some of the boxes. So if you were a student, you could have a page that had a lot of dynamic functionality. But PHP allows you to use certain functions. One of the ones I thought was real fun when I was there was shell execute. The way shell execute works in PHP is pretty much anything you throw at it, it executes it at the shell. So if you do an ls, well, you get a directory listing if it's a Unix box. In this case, they were running on Windows boxes, so dr, you get a directory of whatever's in that directory. But doing this using pipes, you could create your own files and so forth, especially if they didn't necessarily use NTFS. And while now everything is NTFS by default, back then, some people used FAT32 just for the hell of it. And I guess they wanted to boot from a DOS boot disk and still be able to access it. So I wrote an article back in 2004 called Shoveling a Shell with PHP, which essentially uses netcat, and you issue a command using PHP on the remote system Netcat will then establish a connection to you and shovel a shell. The point of that is, well, most firewalls have weaker egress rules than ingress. And if you're behind a NAT box, you're not going to be able to establish a direct connection in unless they have a NAT rule set up for it. But if you can get them to connect to you, you can shovel a shell out. Everybody here familiar or mess around with Metasploit? You know how they have that reverse shell? It's exactly the same idea, except for using Netcat instead. Also, the thing that interests me about Webshells is I've been pwned by them before, or I suppose more accurately, someone has figured an exploit into my box and then used the Webshell to gain more access. I actually had an event about a little over a year ago where I was hosting something for a friend. They had an old content management system that wasn't patched up. It looks like they got in through his site. Since we had a common group ID and they had file permissions to my stuff, they were able to put something on my site via shared hosting. By the way, shared hosting can be a massive pain, and depending on how shared hosting is set up, it might be running as the accounts you log into to FTP or SFTP up files. And if that's the case, they can edit anything they want. Well, they use this access to upload their own shell. Well, the first people were being very quiet about it. They were interested in modifying content and spamming search engines by, if a normal person visited a website, it looked like my website. If someone else visited my website, you got Viagra ads. Well, if Google visited my website, you get Viagra ads. Well, someone else was using a scanner, being really loud about it, and they found someone else's previous web shell and decided to take down my entire website, which was a massive pain in the ass. So I've had a little bit of experience with them from that standpoint too. Now, there's all sorts of common ways to get a web shell on a box. One is via file upload of vulnerabilities. If you actually go searching around and find where people have put web shells, sometimes you'll see like an upload photo or an images folder or an avatar folder where someone's supposed to upload an image. Well, if they don't do proper sanitization, someone would upload something that's not a GIF or a JPEG, but a web shell, and then be able to execute that web shell from the remote box. Or in some cases, just upload there, then go to another site and grab the file. And I'll show how that's done via remote file inclusions shortly. There's also insecure FTP, people who have FTP permissions way too open, so anybody can upload anything they want. There's command injection. You can get command injection on a box. Well, there's a classic example in a tool I'll be talking about here shortly. There's a teaching tool called Utilidae that deliberately implements the OWASP top 10. Its tagline, which I think I got from Seth Mesner, was "Ate up with suck." It was deliberately designed to be bad, and quite frankly, writing bad PHP code was incredibly easy for me. It's since been taken over by someone else, which I'll cover here shortly. Another common way to do these is remote file includes. Sometimes you'll see, like if you go to my website, you'll notice it has a little page equals and then some path. Well, I've designed to filter out what people throw at that. But a lot of content management systems that do something like that and are not properly filtering that, there's something you do called remote file includes, where instead of specifying a local file, you specify some file out on the internet on someone else's website, which I'll show shortly. There's also local file includes, where you happen to know where's a file in the local system or get one there, and try to include that. And I'll demonstrate that as well. There's also even ways of doing it via SQL injection. Like a while back, Jeremy from my local ISSA group, Jeremy Druin, showed me how to use SQL commands to create a file in the local file system, and then you have a web shell that way. So there's tons and tons of ways. There's always vulnerable services. If you can get Metasploit and get an interpreter on a box, you can create any old file you want and create a web shell. Though if you have that level of access, you may or may not want to. Now, I like pointless animation, so I'm going to illustrate how remote file includes work. And this is one of the things I've been tracking on my website, and it's the core way that a lot of people seem to be using web shells. You have a client that makes a request for a site that's vulnerable to RFI. And what that request will have in it is something like, well, let's say it was my site. Instead of having page equals security slash some security article, they'll put in page equals http://mySite.com.mymalware.txt. What would happen there is PHP would suck that in and actually execute the code. And at that point, the evil attacker can then send whatever commands they want. Now, web shells don't really have to be too complicated. Here's a few things I want to show you. This is a local file include via environ. What I showed before was remote file include, where someone references the page someplace else. There's also ways of doing it with local file includes. Has anybody ever seen anything like that in the logs where someone's trying to access, well, ... That's a path transversal attempt. Essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to break out of the web directory. And there used to be a lot of these problems, and I'm sure there still are in various applications. But that last part's a little bit different. The environ is just trying to get the environmental variables. Well, people started to find if they set stuff like the user agent. Like here you see I've set my user agent. Sorry. If I set my user agent and I go ahead and let's see. I set my user agent to that, and then I try to grab environ using a local file include. It'll include this PHP inside of the executing PHP script on the remote website. It'll try to get a particular shell, and from there I can output that shell and then use that shell. This is an example, though, of using local file includes and environmental variables. Also, sometimes you'll see this, instead of just self-environ, you'll see a %00 on the end. That's null termination. One of the things I do on my site is everything automatically has .htm tagged to the end of it, so that people can't arbitrarily choose files. Well, what people started to do, who's here familiar with a null terminator? In C, the way you say that when the end of the string is you put a null byte there, 00 in hex. So what they tried to do is, to keep me from tacking on a .htm, they put a null byte on the end so that it goes in, it sees the null byte when it tries to read the string, it never sees the .htm I tacked on and allows them to execute anyway. And this seems to have been largely fixed, but you'll constantly see this in your logs. At least you see a lot of my logs. There's all sorts of common shells out there, and one of the things I've noticed is people seem to capture shells from other people, don't do any changes to them, don't edit them, maybe not even change the password, and then reuse them someplace else. But here's a bunch of ones you'll see in the wild. C99 is real popular, C100, R57 I've seen a whole bunch of, FX29 shell, Plato shell, and a few that I'm going to show a little bit later. I'm going to show B374K shell and also Weebly. There's also WSO, which seems to be popular. Now, one of the ways I'm going to show this is using Matilde. This is the app I was referring to before as being ate up with suck. It's deliberately vulnerable. Originally, I started something, well, I messed around with WebGoat. WebGoat is this Java server pages, I believe, deliberately vulnerable web application that OWASP puts out so that people can see what these vulnerabilities are like and test them and play with them and understand what the problems are. Unfortunately, WebGoat I thought was a little bit too complicated to exploit, and it wasn't always clear what exactly they wanted you to do with it. So I started Matilde to be dumbass simple to be able to exploit. And essentially it is. I started it off, but since then Jeremy Druin, who's a much better coder than I am, knows much more about web security than I do, has taken over and is running with it. But I'll be using it for some of my demos. Now, here's a simple uploader. And the way the simple uploader works is you can actually make it a lot simpler than this. I have a little form, and this particular bit of PHP code, so I don't have to specify the path completely myself. It figures it out via where it's located, what the host is I'm trying to attack, what the requested URI is, and it'll allow me to upload a file. I select the file, and it has a bunch of stuff in here for debugging, but this is a real simple file uploader, and it could be made even simpler. But here's what it would look like in a Matilde, and let me see if I have a video to actually illustrate that and see if this totally screws things up when I switch back and forth between.
Blank. Blank.
It's just blank.
Still blank.
Let's see, what is my demos? But it's showing up there.
Yeah.
One second. How about now?
Still blank. Nothing. Oh, wait. No signal. And what blank? Oh, no. Now we got the system preferences. That's persistence. And what blue? That'll go blank.
Alright, I might have to record this in a better format at some later time because it's saying it's not being happy. I should have brought a PC up for doing this. Okay, let's, we got it up on my screen there. Would you go ahead and face that towards the screen for me, Georgia?
You want me to zoom out or something?
Um,
Oh, we're zoomed out as far as we can. Never mind.
I'm going to turn this down because I want to do this live. Alright,
All right, you're not in the shot anymore.
that's
but-
okay. You know what? I've never had this problem with this Mac before as far as recording and switching between them. Alright, here's a simple demo of upload. Now, one of the vulnerabilities I have on here is remote file inclusion. And what we'll do is I have a file on imgeek.com. And what we'll do is use that and get it executed inside the context of the PHP code that's inside utility. And this is an even simpler shell than what you saw previously. And what we'll do is that page, see how we replaced it with http imgeek.com? Well, it's going to include that, and that is a shell which I can then use to issue simple commands. And what it did was it stuck in that .text file, but it executed in the context of that PHP script, and I can issue simple commands like ls. And another common task to do would be something like I think a cat out password at some point. Though on a modern system, this isn't going to accomplish a whole lot since hopefully everybody is using shadow passwords at this point. But nothing else, you get a bunch of usernames. But you see I have execution rights in the context of whatever user the web server is running as. I think I have something else to show in here as well. Trying to think of the next thing I actually execute is. Oh, uploader. I have a simple uploader, and what we'll do with the uploader is I'm going to upload a different shell. Sometimes you have a really complex shell that you can't easily include via remote file include, but if you have a really simple uploader like this, you can get that uploader executed via remote file inclusion, and then use it to upload a better shell. Selecting a file. I'm trying to remember what I uploaded at this particular time. Okay, that's finished. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. And nothing is coming up there?
No.
Sorry, I want to get this thing straightened out if I absolutely can.
No. No. Oh, wait, no signal.
There you go.
I see your desktop. Oh,
And how about now? Okay, I finally got it. Macs are a pain for trying to get everything up and functioning. Okay, that was the simple uploader. And just basically I can use it, remote file, include it, and then upload something better for later use. And here's that super simple shell example, where essentially all I'm doing is saying wherever the shell is, I want to send commands to it whenever I do a post, and whatever command I send into it, it executes that using shell execute on the remote box. So web shells don't have to be complex. I can show you some really much more complex ones here shortly. But here's me just doing a quick directory command using a web shell. Now, web shells can also be really small. The ones I put up there were larger. They weren't exactly complex, but the simpler you make things sometimes, the harder they are to read. Anybody's ever heard of Perl as a write-only language? Perl's a programming language. Can be, depending on who's writing it, can look like line noise, as they say. It can be hard to read. And for instance, that shell at the top and the next shell are some that people come up with the smallest web shell you could possibly create for executing a command on a remote box. However, if you're going to do much that's larger, it's probably not the way you want to design it. By the way, I got those from, or something similar to it from Frederick Almoff. Almoff? Oh well. I like to give credit to wherever I find stuff from, and I found a bunch of really cool web shell techniques from various people on the internet. And I've always showed a quick demo of doing a remote file include and uploading something. So the idea is to upload it with something simple and small, and then to upload a better shell, something that may not be easily includable by remote file includes. Now, if you've ever messed around with web shells, there's all sorts of sources out there. Shell.org is, of course, one of them that you can find. A lot of people seem to reuse ones they have themselves. I'd recommend if you want something a little bit more trustworthy, check out the Laudium project. This is from people's Secure Ideas. At Secure Ideas, they have tons of different web shells and different programming languages. Kevin Johnson's one of the main guys who's developing that, and does a ton of different web shells for different platforms. Like if you need one for Code Fusion, I think he's got one out there for that. Also in Kali Linux, if you look underneath the user share web shells directory, you'll find ones out there for, well, pretty much any development environment you're likely to encounter. ASP, Code Fusion, Java Server Pages, Perl, and PHP. And there's also this script that I wrote, which what it's doing is it's grepping through my logs to find stuff. I'll explain how it works. It's kind of the main reason I was even doing this talk was I was curious what people were hitting me with, and I wanted to collect what web shells people were trying to use in the wild. And since my page looks like it's exploitable, because that page equals is a big, warning sign to people like, ooh, maybe I should try something on this, I decided to run a honeypot of sorts. So what happens is I have this Python file that runs via cron job. I think I may have it set for every 4 hours or so. And it reads all the logs in my recent log files, like the last 2 days. And it greps for anything that looks like it might be an RFI. Usually what I'm grepping for is anything that has equals http:// in it, because someone's trying to do a remote file include via that, and it ends in a text, inc, dat, or back. The reason, oh, Georgia, can you put that back on me? Oh, thank you. The reason that's the particular thing that tacking on to the end is if it was a PHP shell, if they put it on a site that's running PHP and it sees the PHP extension, it's going to execute it on the remote site that it's on, that's hosting it, and not the one they're trying to remote file include it on. So that's why you're commonly going to see them in the extension to a text is one of the most common ones I've seen. It checks to see if the thing is still active, so it goes out and tries to actually grab the web shell, and if it's still active, it lets you know so you can go out and collect it yourself and take a look at it on the site it's running from. It outputs information like the attacker's IP, who was trying to access my website through that shell, who was actually the one, well, it gives me the IP address of the browser who made the request to my site to go grab that other site's TXT file. It also says, gives me who is information, who is that particular IP address it's attacking, if it's who the ISP is, gives me the URL to the web shell, the refer, because sometimes you'll find where they're clicking from might be of interest, the time it happened, and all sorts of other things. I'm going to show it here in a second. Also, it now saves the uniques for later, because a lot of people use the same web shell over and over again, and I don't want to see the exact same thing in my logs over and over again. So it looks for uniques, and a feature I've added since the last time I gave this talk was it now downloads the script and saves it off, because hopefully if people do things right, what they're going to do is say, oh, someone got this TXT that's a web shell they're using to attack others on my site, so I'm going to remove it. I still want to be able to analyze them later, so I don't have to constantly monitor this. What it does now is it sucks down that web shell, and we can look at it later. Oh, another thing it does is user agent notification. I decided to be nice. I don't want people to think that I was attacking them because I'm constantly trying to access this web shell that people have infected them with myself. And so, you know, imgeek.com constantly going to somebody.com/bot.txt might look suspicious. So I put this in my user agent field. So when they look in the logs, it tells them exactly what I'm doing and says, hey, I'm not attacking you, but someone else apparently already has and has put this web shell that's hosted there. You might want to remove that. And I put them to my website so they can check it out.
Does anybody ever contact you on that?
No one. Hey, I figured it was the right thing to do to put it out there. Okay, yeah, it's catching up. And here's that web shell page I was telling you about. I might need to make the screen a little bigger.
Publish it as a source signature too.
Oh, all the source code for this, by the way, is out there. It's a simple Python script. And we were actually talking about job skill interviews a while back, and someone said they were great at Python, and someone else said, well, all right, write me something to brute force a PHP-based web application while I'm out to lunch. Well, I don't think I could do that by any means. My Python skills basically amount to Googling for how the hell do I do this? Luckily, with web pages like Stack Overflow, there's a lot of details out there. So all this gobbledygook is the Python that I've put together to create the page that I had up previously. And the page I had up previously is this. This is the attacker. This is the person who's actually using the web browser or some other script on their box to make a request to my website. From my website, they're trying to remote file include this particular path. And I can go out there and check out that path, and it may be there, it may not be there. I'm not really sure quite what this is. That doesn't look like a normal web shell, but for some reason or other, they tried to include it. What they might be doing is using some kind of scanner to say, okay, if after making this request, if I see this string on IMGeek's site, that means it must have been successful. I can come back later with something more complex. Also, just in case that person takes it down, I have it to where you can download a zip file. It should be password protected. Webshells is the Webshells the username and password. The reason I put a password on it is I didn't want Google and other search engines to hit my site and go, ooh, this guy's hosting malware. I sort of am, but I'm very clear about the academic purpose of why I'm hosting it. Oh, another thing is if you have a really obfuscated one, and I need to find a good obfuscated one. There is various tools to deobfuscate. And I'm trying to find one that someone's tried to make difficult to read. That's another thing you'll find. A lot of people don't even bother to make those shells difficult to interpret. Like so far, all these ones I've brought up, oh, this one's kind of interesting. This one looks like it actually has a component involving IRC. There's a lot of things out there, a lot of scripts out there called Buddha shells. And what a Buddha shell is, someone might hire out their service and say, hey, you want to take this gamer offline, or you want to screw these people on IRC? You give us so much money, I'll let you have a network of my Buddha shells to knock them off the internet. And the way Buddha shells is distributed denial of service, but instead of having tons and tons of end-user PCs, they have just a few, maybe a few hundred, instead of a few thousand desktop machines, maybe tens or hundreds of web servers. They have less machines, but web servers have a lot more bandwidth. So if you want to knock someone off, that's one way to do it. And this looks like this is likely a Buddha script of some kind. I'm trying to, unfortunately I didn't prep for this one as well as I did. I should have. I should have had something that was obfuscated. But if you find what's obfuscated that looks like gobbledygook, there's also another resource I have here that says View on PHP Decoder. And some people at Ballistic Security have written something that takes obfuscated PHP and tries to decipher it. So if you happen to find a web shell that looks like, line noise, you can use this and be able to interpret it. Another thing you notice, a lot of people don't use standard agents. If I was trying to be surreptitious and not, flag anything weird, I would use something like, this for example, something that looks like a standard user agent that you might see a web browser giving. Someone using this, libwww.perl, I'm pretty sure that they're scripting something, and yeah, it's possible they're doing it for legitimate means, but it also might be something I would, raise my attention. Oh, another thing my script does is whenever it sees the site doesn't appear to be up, it throws it out into a likely dead links. Unfortunately, it only does that if it hasn't failed once. So I need to do some additions to that to make it a little bit better. And that was one that someone's actually gone in and removed. And I wish I had a good obfuscated one in this collection. Let me see. Do I have anything in here? Oh, here's one someone tried to obfuscate. This one's kind of cool. If I run this through that scripted ballistic security, it might be able to interpret a whole lot of that. And I'll talk about some more about how people obfuscate. You see here how they try to base64 encode it and gzip deflate it, and then they reverse the process here. But by doing this, they try to obfuscate it and make it so I can't see that they're trying to execute shell commands. Another thing you see that they did on this, they put the header in it that you'd expect to see in a GIF. And by doing this, they hope to bypass things like, well, I mentioned before, let's say there's a really piss-poor form system that allows you to upload any avatar you want. Well, it might say, oh, I'm going to do some sanity checks. I'll check to make sure this is really a GIF. Well, if all they're doing is checking the very first few bytes, this might bypass that. All right, let's go. Ah, crap. Let me fast forward through all that and get back to this good stuff. All right, there's all sorts of subtypes. I already mentioned uploaders before. These are simple scripts, and some of these things may not technically be considered web shells, but they're in the same vein because you commonly get them via remote file includes, and they're meant to give greater levels of access to the attacker. But an uploader is usually a simple script just for uploading files. Though something that's also a general shell script is likely to have an uploader as well. That's your general web shells, and I'll be showing a few of those. These allow execution, uploads of files, seeing what processes are running. Also, a lot of them are now building stuff so you can query the local databases and dump information that way. Those testers or ideas, some of the shells I have seem to do nothing, but if the shell runs, it emails the attacker. So I guess they wanted to just do a simple test and say, hey, I don't want you to totally exploit the box, but if you find a box that's vulnerable, report back to me and I'll play with it later. Those search engine spammers, these are people who go in and modify the content of a site so that, let's say, a normal user hits it, it looks like the normal person's site. So the admin doesn't know, he doesn't get alerted because to all the users it looks normal. However, if Googlebot hits it and sees Googlebot in it, well, Googlebot gets a bunch of Viagra ads or something else. And since it has the word Viagra in the URL or in the linking text, it increases the search engine optimization because it sees that. So the idea is basically SEO spam. There's also booters I mentioned before, people who get these shells on remote boxes and use them as flutters to harass people. And also local routers. This is not exactly a web shell by any means, but when someone gets a web shell on a box, hopefully the box is configured right, it's running as what is IUSR something underneath IIS, or they use Apache, Nobody, HTTP. I've seen different ones on different Linux systems. An account that's not full privileged, something that's very limited. But if you're on, let's say, a Linux box and you don't have a full-blown account, well, that kind of sucks. So what a local router does is once you have the script running on the remote box, it uses local exploits to be able to try to elevate privileges to, let's say, root, and then you can do anything you want. So this is one of the reasons that even if someone's web application, or even if someone is running a web server as something less powerful than root, someone might still be able to get root access via it. Oh, also the common obfuscations, and I showed some of these before. In PHP, and I'm sure these exist in other development languages. As again, my website is developed in PHP, so I've focused on PHP. These same kind of things are going to exist in other languages, just with different function calls. There's gz inflate and gz deflate. Essentially, this is zipping the file up and unzipping the file. And by doing that, you make it harder for people to read. Though it also causes people to be able to detect things because there's certain detectors out there that will look for the length of a string as a sign of whether or not something is a web shell. Base64 decode and base64 encode. Now base64, the purpose of it is, in some systems you don't want any kind of binary data flying through. It's only supposed to accept ASCII, normal text. So by doing this, you can encode everything in 64 different characters, no matter what the binary is, and be able to send it through, like, say, common mail systems. So by using base64 encode and decode, they can obfuscate something and make it hard to read. There's also all sorts of other encodings. ROT13, while it's really crappy encryption as far as securing it from confidentiality, if all you want to do is bypass someone's filters, it might very well be all someone needs. And reverse URL encode and just a ton of other ones. And for instance, here's a truncated example. I didn't want to put the entire string, but someone could do base64 encode something. Then actually, sorry, the order in which they'd have to do it is they'd have to gzip deflate it, then base64 encode it. Then when they do the reverse process, they get back the original code. Then they use the eval command in PHP to execute that code. And as I mentioned before, sorry, I said ballistic security earlier. Ballast Security has a great site for decoding these kind of obfuscations. There's some that it doesn't seem to be able to de-obfuscate either. Now here's a simple example that I made myself. This is a very simple web shell. All it does is it takes a user input and executes it using Shell Connect. Well, I use mobilefish.com. They have a service on there that you can throw different common PHP obfuscations at your code. And I got back out that. So the first thing I did was I did the gzip deflate it. Oh, sorry. I'm reversing my orders there. Anyway, that particular thing is ROT13 encoded, base64 encoded, and also zipped up. So that's going to be awfully hard for someone to parse. But something like a Ballast Security's tool should be able to handle that one no problem. That is obfuscating the shell itself, so people don't know what it's necessarily doing. And as you saw as I was going through my examples of who all was attacking me, a lot of people don't even bother to do that. Then again, I'm not sure how many people actually bother to look through the logs because no one's contacted me about, hey, thanks for finding that shell on our machine. So maybe people aren't looking, I don't know. But besides this, there's also obfuscation of the traffic. Because you see how I'm sending commands to it. I'm sending post messages and maybe get messages. There's a whole bunch of different protocol commands in HTTP. Two of the most common are get and post. Get is basically whenever you try to get something from a site. Like when you type in imgeek.com/somewebpage.html. That's a get request. It's in the URL that you want to get that particular page. You also might see that page equals something, and that value, that is a get type request to a form or some kind of code running on the remote box. There's also post. In post, all the variables are inside the headers, which I don't think I actually have an illustration to show you. The nice thing about using post, it somewhat obfuscates things because it's not going to show up in the web logs, though any IDS with its salt is going to see that because it's going to be inspecting post also. So people started thinking about, well, what other ways we can exchange communications with the web shells to make it more complicated? Well, there's cookie headers. People may not necessarily think about seeing these kind of communications inside cookies. And there's also some multiple levels of obfuscation someone can do to make it more and more expensive computationally to look at everything. I mean, if someone encrypts, base64 encodes, does tons of different things to the script, how much are you going to have your boxes sitting on your perimeter do to decode that and actually look at it? Okay, so there's all sorts of web shells out there that are open source. You can get them from Google Code. Nice little projects. One of them is a B374K shell, and it has a bunch of nice features. One is it's pretty simple to use. It's polymorphic, so it can keep changing itself, so it won't match the same signatures. Has database functionality, so if you happen to get into a remote box and you want to dump, let's say, all the users' password hashes, you might be able to do that, or passwords depending on how bad the application is written. Also has a process explorer, so you can try to kill processes. So hopefully if it's not running as a privileged user, it's not going to be able to do that. And it can also do reverse or bind shells, so you can send a shell back to you via something akin to Netcat. it looks like this, and let me see if I have a nice demo for it. Let's see, yeah. I can't all these because I'm afraid of the demo gods. And I wish I got this to work the first time, because now it's actually displaying on my capture box. Alright, you see here, I have that b.php, and I'm using that same remote file include uploader from before. So I did a remote file include uploader, got it, uploaded my B374K shell, and if I was to look at that file, it looks like that. It's all obfuscated, and actually that particular one I'm using is the polymorphic one, so every time it's executed, it changes itself. Though that might not be a good option because it's on a system that's you have no edit rights to. That's not going to function right. So here you see I'm accessing it, but while I used a separate upload to get this up there, I believe B374K shell will work via remote file include OK. You see I've logged into it, and here I have a directory listing. I can go through and play with the files, see what they have. Nice thing about that is some people take old code and call it something.old or something.else. So if you want to see the source code for a page, you might be able to go and look at it this way. And in the source code, you're likely to find passwords and such, which is a nice way of doing privilege isolation. Here you see I'm going into the shell part where I'm just going to do a simple command of catting out the password file. Now in this case, the box has shadow passwords turned on, so all I get is usernames, but still. Also, I can try connecting to MySQL on the box. In this case, I happen to know the password, but if someone has a blank password or they use something silly like root, you can connect in, show the databases. And I wish that screen was coming up better there. Show the databases in there, and if you wanted to, you could dump them. Like, let's see, there's the NOAS one. And what we'll try to do is select from all accounts and show the contents of that accounts table. And I think I screwed up my command somehow. Yeah, I should have removed the show first. So I'm using the NOAS database, bringing up the tables and showing everything in accounts. And here I see all the fields. And if I scroll down, I see the information on each one of the accounts, including the password, because, well, Matilda is deliberately designed to be insecure, so I don't even hash the passwords in it. It also has some other functionality. For instance, you have your bind shell, which is you start up a shell in them and you connect to them. There's the reverse shell, which sends the shell back to you. It just has a ton of nice little features. Though it's not exactly the most advanced web shell. I'll show something a little bit more advanced here in a second. How am I doing for time?
About 12 minutes.
All right. You see I can cook through this. Again, I apologize for all the video problems. Hopefully the next speaker won't have the same problems I did. Okay. Another nice shell is Weebly. Now Weebly has a ton of different features. You get it off GitHub. It's tiny. It sends everything encrypted. It does its communication over cookies, so it's not doing those posts and gets. And if people aren't looking at cookies, they may not know what it is, and it's all going to be obfuscated anyway. So this is going to be hard to detect. And also, it's kind of like Metasploit in a way because it has modules you can throw into it. Some modules, I mean, I could list all these, but then I'd run out of my 12 minutes. Various database ones has various things. So once you get the web shell inside an internal network, you can start mapping out the DMZ because there's all sorts of port scanning functionality. You can dump the local SQL databases. Just a bunch of really, really nice features. Oh, you can also mount remote file systems via HTTP. That's nice. Let's see, anything else cool in this? Well, it has some brute force capabilities. So once you get internal to a box, well, if you come at someone's web server, you're already probably at a more privileged part of the network, so you might be able to use it as a pivot to get to other things. And that's kind of like what Weebly is all about. So let's fire up Weebly. And here, the first command I'm going to do is I'm just going to get Weebly. All I do is git clone it and grab the package. Now I already have Weebly installed in this box, so that command fails. But if I didn't have it installed, it would fail. I go into the Weebly directory, and I'm going to have to generate my own Weebly install. Now Weebly itself, the one that generates the PHP file, it is written in Python, but the file it outputs is in PHP. And I can generate my own username and password for it. Or should I just generate my password for it? And then I somehow get it uploaded to the remote box. So as you see, my output there is the weebly.php file. I'm going to use my uploader shell again, just because it's convenient, and to get Weebly on the remote box. Now, as I said before, it communicates using cookies, which means I can't just use another web browser to send stuff, because with a web browser, generally speaking, I can make gets and posts, but I'm not going to be able to easily edit my cookie information. So you have to use a special client to get Weebly to work. If you just visit the PHP script itself, you saw you just got a blank page. Well, what you have to do is you have to use Weebly itself as a client. Oh, by the way, that's the obfuscated code that Weebly produced. So I'm going to use Weebly as a client, I believe, next, and connect to the remote box. Since I just point to where it's at, oh, by the way, hackme.imgeek.com, feel free to attack that site if you want. I have it out there for everybody. Throw whatever malicious stuff you want. If you can take it down, let me know. If anybody in looks up on it, you get the joke. Alright. It has tab completion, which isn't working right now, but you get a command line when you use the Weebly client. Like I said, you can't use a regular web browser if you use it. But on the other side, it is much more advanced and harder to detect. I can execute commands on the remote box. Who am I? Well, I'm currently running as www.data, which means I have fairly low privileges. A bunch of different plugins you can use on it. You can use NetScan, so if you want to do something kind of like a ghetto InMap on the inside of the network, now that you're there, you can do that. Stuff for dumping SQL databases, brute forcing the SQL password. Someone may say, well, I have SQL cut down to where only people inside my network can access it, so I don't really need to get a good password for it. Well, maybe you do. Defense in depth. System info, this just tells you a bunch of information about the system, like what version of Linux it's running. Might better use this to find something like what I mentioned before, router shells, things to get higher levels of privilege. Well, once you know what the system is running, that might be useful information to find a router shell that might help you out. What's next? There's a ton of modules in this one. Let me see. Oh, let's see. Find writables. One of the plugins it has is find writable files. So even if you don't have great levels of privileges, they may have left some file writable that they shouldn't have that you can use and edit to do something bad. Or if they have one that set user ID to root, that can be really, really bad if you can edit that. Here's an example of NetScan, but it's going to take too long probably to complete. But anyway, Weebly has a lot of stuff in it. Let's just make that the long and short of it. Now, the next thing to come up is how do you detect all these? Let's see, and we got some stuff for that too. There's also always a hiding it. A guy named goes by the handle WildGhoul found a way to add PHP code into a .htaccess file, and by doing that, people don't look at the .htaccess files, so they don't think they're going to look for shells in those, and it's another obfuscated way of getting a shell out there. In this one, you see in the htaccess file itself, it is about .htaccess file, and people aren't allowed to directly access it, but it's also told via the .htaccess file that depending on how it's accessed, it's also a PHP file and to execute it. So you can hide PHP web shells inside of htaccess files. Also, to avoid being indexed by search engines, attacker may add features like, hey, if you see your Google bot, don't tell anybody about me, ignore me, don't show anything. Laudium is one of the things that does that. You can restrict what IP addresses can access it, which is another thing that Laudium has built in. Legal obfuscations, I saw this in some shell that I was analyzing, that they tried to say that I couldn't reverse engineer it because of copyright law. Yeah, let's see them come after me. All right, finding web shells and attack attempts. All sorts of ways. You can grep for them, but this is going to be hugely hit or miss. You probably like my script better. It has some code built in for doing it. But you can simply grep for your logs for any time someone tries to use equals http:// I should also include https probably in there. And look for files that end in text, include, or dat. You can look for certain bad functions. If you want to go outside the logs and just look at the files directly, look for things like eval, base64 decode, gzinflate, people might be using for obfuscation, though these also have legitimate uses. So it's not going to be perfect, but it cuts down the number of files you might want to look at. You've got a lot of false positives. It does all sorts of tools out for doing it. I've seen some AV remove web shells, but it's very hit or miss and mostly miss. There's also a few tools like PHP shell detector and NeoPy that you can use for finding shells. So let's actually bring up that. Here, I think the first thing I do is I use grep to be able to try to see if anybody's been using shells on me by looking at the web logs. An important part of that is the looking for anything equals http://, so that's not all-inclusive. I also want to, of course, be case insensitive. I typed that into another one, just look for anything that ends in .text, and here's a bunch of different things that look like they might be attempts to get a web shell to run via remote file include on my box. Now, that's not an incredibly advanced way of going about things. Another thing you can do is, I think the next thing I have set up is grep for common bad functions. Unfortunately, this is going to be hit or miss. By the way, a version of these slides is already from my website, and all these commands, because it's going to be awfully hard to read this. But I did a grep throughout the file system, or at least throughout my web directories, for files that contain those certain bad functions or suspect functions. And there's also some tools that do it for you and a little bit more advanced. One of the ones is a PHP shell detector. I'm going to go ahead and use Git to get that. And when you run it, you copy it out to wherever your web directory is, and you run it from there. And it looks for various things. It looks like signatures, maybe some bad functions, so many bad functions in a row, and tries to tell you what things might possibly be web shells. So I've copied it out to my directory and access it via a web browser. Demos are so captivating when they're in video, aren't they? But it's essentially running through and it's detecting via signatures, which are very hit or miss, and certain bad functions, and shows me what might possibly be a web shell. I can then look at the line and look at it a little bit better and see whether or not it actually is a web shell. So it's a nice, convenient tool to use. Probably continue at that point. It's not too much point in it. That one was identified because of it has C99 in it. Let me fast forward some. A different one you can use is NeoPy. I basically git clone it also. NeoPy has a bunch of different functionality. Besides signatures, it also looks for like really long strings. You know, a lot of those obfuscations compose really, really long strings. That's one way of looking for it. It also looks for the amount of entropy, the randomness of something. If something is encrypted, it should have a high degree of entropy, a lot of randomness to it. So if it has a lot of randomness to it, it might be an obfuscated shell, so it can tell me that way. Let's see, what all else does it have? But those are like some of the main functions it has. Look for entropy, look for things that match certain long strings, things that match certain signatures. And I want to get it to actually run. I'm going to fast forward just a little bit. All right, I'm going to run NeoPy, point to the directory I want, tell it how I want to detect it. I'm going to say, use all your functionality. Tell me what you think might be web shells. Once I get past this video, I actually have very little left. Okay, so NeoPy is going to run for me and do all those tests and find things it thinks might be web shells, and then I can go inspect them, and if they are, remove them. Go back here. All right, so that's detecting them. Let's talk about general hardening to keep people from being able to get web shells on a box. Of course, who does it run as? If you happen to be running as a user with way too much privileges, that's going to be bad. I'm hoping gone are the days of someone running a web server as root, but I don't know. Permissions that are too weak, I've seen people create files one place, copy them someplace else, and then maybe change the owner, but it still has world writable permissions to files they shouldn't. So there's various commands you can use with find to go out there and look for files that have way too much permission. There's also commands to automatically go out and fix the problem, though use these with caution. Anytime you automatically go, hey, this entire directory, assign permissions this way, be paranoid, but it is a possibility. There's also all sorts of PHP INI tweaks. Allow ASP style tags. You can turn that off. I've seen some people use these type to, well, funny thing is I've seen people use these and only use to attack sites, but if they have this feature turned on, then it totally fails. And it's not the most compatible way, but it's a way of making some shells incompatible. That's not going to be very effective against maybe some skitties. Some people suggest turning off PHP banners, but that's security through obscurity. You can disallow HTTP file uploads, that might help. And also displaying errors, you can turn that to off. If it's on, it allows someone to more easily probe an application going, oh, that's what's wrong, that file doesn't exist there, or that database doesn't exist. The more information someone has about an application, the easier it is for them to exploit it. More effective techniques you can use is you turn off allow URL file open. That should be able to kill a lot of the functionality I showed you as far as doing remote file includes. Same thing for allow URL include. And you can also disable easily abused functions like system, execute, shell pass-through, and shell execute. Pass-through and shell execute. These all allow you to execute something on the remote box. Safe mode was an option, but that's largely been depreciated. It did things like turn off certain bad functions, and also made it so that many functions were modified so that the UID of the script and files directory operated on have to be the same. So if one was owned by one user and one was owned by a different user, it wouldn't work. But that's been depreciated since PHP version 5.3.0. You can also try out Apache Mod Security. It looks for, well, it has a bunch of different features, but one of the rule sets it has is looking for common Trojans, where it's going to look for strings like C99 and try to block them. Though some people install this and they get a little bit overzealous, because for instance, my shell page, I had to turn off some security features to get it to even function, because my host would see C99 in something and freak out and not even serve the page up. It's kind of misses the point of what I wanted to do. But you can set that up as well. There's all sorts of other Apache tweaks. For instance, turning off indexing helps. The time I told you about when my box got exploited was, well, it's actually not my box, it's on a shared host. I had the folder indexing turned on. So if someone went to a folder, like iget.com/security/, it would show up everything in that folder. Well, what the attacker did was they went to one of these folders and said, oh, I can see in it, and I can see this one particular script someone else left behind for me. I'm going to go use it. So turn that off is nice. And another thing you can do if you want to go out searching for other people's shells, let's see. You can do a search of anything that's index of c99.txt. And you might find some people that already have shells out there where you can find them. A few other scripts you can look into. I have some on my website where it automatically does an MD5 of all the files on the site, and if it ever changes, it checks every so often and lets me know if something changes. Yes, I know MD5 has collision issues, but we're not talking about passwords, we're talking about files, and being able to actually replace the file with something that's going to MD5 hash the exact same thing is going to be, what?
Not trivial.
It's going to be difficult in these situations, but okay, I need to rewrite it with SHA. Thank you, sorry. All right, I also have scripts to grep for common RFIs and web shells and password grabs. I have this script I wrote called Log Watcher. It shows me who all's been attacking me possibly. Well, if someone has a lot of 404s, they might be using something like, what's a common one? Durbuster, to see if I have something installed that I may or may not. That's going to cause a lot of 404s. People throwing random crap at my web applications, it's probably going to cause a lot of 500-something errors. Here's a list of like RFIs people have used against me, and this script is out there on my website if anybody wants to try using it. I also can show people who have been trying to grab my passwords, though not technically mine since it's a shared host. Oh, remember that null terminated thing I mentioned before? That's someone trying that particular exploit. But this allows me to look through and also allows me to click on a host I dislike and say, well, it's not going back to that page quickly. I can click on shitcan and automatically tell htaccess not to allow them. And it may not work real well right now, but one of the things it does is it also gives me whois information. Like if I mouse over the info, sorry, if I mouse over this, it should eventually get back a report about the whois information. Unfortunately, that is behaving very slowly at this particular point. I can also just click on info and go out to Rob text to find out the same information, possibly a little better because my whois code is subpar. All right, tons of links for researching on this. Go out and check out all these people. I don't have time to go through all of them, but WildGirl was especially impressive because of his embedding of PHP shell inside of a htaccess file. Some people have done some reports on antivirus and detection of web shells. Bottom line is not very good job is done. Let's see, there's stuff out there about how to detect these obfuscate shells. You want something a little bit more complex than my talk. There's an intro to NeoPi out there as well. Oh, there's some talk about DOS booter shells, which I mentioned before. And while I was at B-Sides Rhode Island, a couple of people gave a talk there, Allison Nixon and Brandon Levine. If you want to go check it out, I have it up on my website. This particular PowerPoint slide presentation, a slightly older version, is already on my website if you go searching for it. Another thing is, everybody can make it. We're having DerbyCon this year, September 25th through the 29th. This is the crew, and a bunch of shout outs to all the other conferences I go to on a regular basis. And I have to cut this now because I've ran way long. Thank you very much for your time.
So if you have any questions for Adrian, you can grab them all.